Well, we've made it to our last session for this first inaugural Renaissance Week renovation. I think we have a really nice speaker teed up for this evening or for this afternoon, Mr. Darren Wells. Just to give you a little overview of his background, he started his career as a financial analyst for Ford Motor Credit Company, which is a captive finance source for Ford Motor. He was a manager in the treasurer's office there at FMCC. He was a controller of Ford Investment Enterprises and finance director of Ford Credit in the Australia division. He was the assistant treasurer of Visteon Corp, and he led the development of the treasury function there when it was being spun off by Ford Motor Company. He joined Goodyear as vice president and treasurer in August of 2002. He progressed on as senior vice president in business development and treasurer. He then went on to senior VP of finance and strategy, and then executive VP and chief financial officer for the Goodyear Tire and Rubber Company, effective October 17th of 2008. He has a BA from DePaul University here in Indiana, and received his MBA in finance from Kelley, and currently resides in Hudson, Ohio. So please welcome me and join one of our very own, Darren Wells.
Yeah, good afternoon, and Nathan, thanks very much for the introduction. It's exciting to be back here. I have not been back to Kelley in a while, and I tell you, the facilities look a lot nicer than I remember. But I am happy to be back, and that was pretty quick rundown. And I knew that coming in, they said one of the things that you'd be interested in knowing about is how I got here. Because I've gotten to the job I wanted to have back when I was at Kelley. And it felt obviously felt good to get there. Although getting to a CFO job in 2008 was a mixed blessing, given the state of the world economy at that time. But yeah, no, it's been an interesting path for me. And the topic I came to today is kind of interesting, because I'm going to talk to you about the development of corporate vision, which is a little bit outside of the realm of most of my finance training, and a little bit outside of what I spent most of my career doing. But I've been tremendously fortunate at Goodyear to have the opportunity to work there in interesting times. And when you work in a place in interesting times and you're a finance guy, you get involved in a lot of things. And as Goodyear worked its way through what was a very tough situation in the early part of the 2000s, developing the right financial strategy was as important as the right marketing strategy or the right business strategy. And that pulled me in and ultimately resulted in me getting responsibility for developing the company's strategy. So, so we went through a long period of time at Goodyear where we were, I'll say, focused on volume. And when I drove up to Goodyear in 2002 for my first day of work, I drove underneath a sign that said Goodyear, first in tires. And I thought, okay, not sure I know exactly what that means, but I quickly came to understand that what that meant was volume, right? So, and that's easy. If you're in the tire business, and I see this with my colleagues, it's kind of strange because if you go somewhere and I'm riding in a taxi cab in New York City, driving down the street and we stop at a stoplight, everybody else is looking at the buildings. I'm looking at the tires of the vehicles next to me. And it's weird, if you go there with 3 or 4 people from a tire company, they all do the same thing. So we're all looking out our own windows trying to figure out who's on the city buses, who's on the taxi cabs, who's on the other vehicles. So it's very natural to want your product displayed everywhere. And I think that there was a lot to that over the history of Goodyear, because for many, many years, the auto industry was in huge growth mode globally. Tire companies had to follow, and having as many of your tires out there as possible was as much of a vision as you needed. And what that did, though, ultimately for Goodyear, by the time I got there, and I think arguably by the late 90s, it put us in a position where the business model didn't work very well. And in order to keep going after additional volume, one of the actions that was taken was acquiring the operations of a Japanese tire company called Sumitomo Rubber. How many people have heard of Sumitomo Rubber? Okay. Thought there might be some. I like Sumitomo Rubber best for their golf equipment. So they, that's what I know them for. So Srixon golf balls and golf equipment. That's some of their, some of the stuff that they do. They have a big sporting division that does some fairly high-profile stuff. They're also a global business partner of Goodyear, but we bought the Dunlop brand and formed a joint venture with them to run that. So Goodyear is Dunlop and vice versa. And the Dunlop brand is a worldwide brand for tires not known as well in the U.S. But it was all about getting bigger. And and that was the strategy behind it. And we took advantage of the fact, Goodyear took advantage of the fact that SRI had some financial difficulties at the time. But the company still did a big debt-funded acquisition right before the economy turned down. And that is never a good story. That story never ends well. In addition to that, Goodyear had gotten to a point where we took a lot of business producing tires for automotive manufacturers, including the ones in Detroit. That wasn't good business. It was volume, kept our factories full. It meant a lot more cars had our brand rolling around on them, but we ultimately weren't making any money at that. And again, that's a story that doesn't end well. When you convince yourself it's worth selling products, even though you don't make a return on them, whether you call it strategic or you call it brand awareness or you call it whatever you want, it's not a good thing. And Goodyear did a lot of that. So by the time I got to the company in 2002 and into 2003, when we had a new CEO appointed, we were developing a lot of big problems that all came to roost about the time I got there, which I guess I'm fortunate in that I got to live through an interesting time at Goodyear. I think I'm unfortunate in that I wasn't smart enough to spot all the problems that were there. So I didn't go in eyes open. I went in thinking things were pretty stable. This is a big company, Goodyear. Everybody's heard of Goodyear. It's great to work for a company with a global brand. It used to be a Dow component. It's a huge global company. It must be okay. 6 months after I was there, we were clearly not okay. And I'm not going to give a corporate finance presentation or even talk about everything it took to keep the company liquid through that period of time. And when I mean liquid, I'm not talking beverages. I'm talking about enough cash to keep our operations running. That was a big challenge, and we went through then a period of time from 2003 till 2007, going through a very classic corporate turnaround, and very successful. And I give the CEO at the time enormous credit for putting together a team that could do it. And I think the diversity of the team he put together will ultimately play a role in the vision discussion that we have today. So then, I think arguably at that time, 2007, we had done a lot of what we set out to do in 2003, turn around the business, start to get out of some of that business that wasn't profitable, get our orientation shifted so we weren't so focused on volume, we were focused on where we could make money, which is what we had to do, and making sure we were leveraging all the assets we had, all the technology that we had, all the relationships that we had in order to improve our business. Now, we had done that, and we were probably ready about at that time to start thinking about vision and strategy. Because while you're in the fire, it's not a good time to think about strategy. While you're in the fire, you're thinking about what are you going to do this week and next week. But once the business was stabilized, we were ready to think about that. And then the global financial crisis hit in 2008. So we spent a couple of years going through and dealing with that. And particularly for companies with big pension obligations and things of that nature, this has been a particularly challenging time. So, and again, I won't dwell on that, but I'll say that put off a little bit what might otherwise have been the right time for us to focus on this. But that ultimately brought us to a time in 2010. In 2010, a couple of things happened. First of all, the markets that we were in stabilized. All right, so the markets were in free fall in 2008 and for a good part of 2009. By 2010, things were stable, things were coming back a bit, and the focus that we had could start to be a little bit longer term, and that was important. The other thing that happened is Goodyear got a new CEO. So we had the same CEO from 2003 through 2010, which was pretty good time frame. He was a great guy to take us through a very tough turnaround. But by 2010, it was time for his successor to take over. And Rich Kramer, who's our CEO now, took over then. He had been part of the team that had gotten us from 2003 to 2010 and was now ready to take over as CEO. And what Rich understood, and I give him a lot of credit for at the time, is he understood we were in a different spot, right? Is we had gotten really, really good at being a turnaround. We'd gotten very, very good at cutting costs. We'd gotten very, very good at scraping by on minimal resources. Those were core competencies. But we were still one of the biggest 3 tire companies in the world, and we had some very big competitors out there. And those guys had lots of money, and they had good technology, they had good people, they had good engineers, and we were still going to have to figure out a way to compete with them. So when Rich was thinking about this, he knew that several things were going to be required, and part of it was going to be a new business strategy. So we were at a different place as a company. We were looking out into the future, 5 to 10 years out in the tire industry, and we were thinking about how are we going to win? How are we going to win? How are we going to get more than our fair share of the profits that are available to tire companies globally? But he also knew something else, and that is that after a number of tough years, he was going to have to figure out how to get 70,000 people working in 80 different countries all on the same agenda. And that's where the story of the vision statement for us and the vision that we developed for the company begins. It was the idea of getting 70,000 people to all think alike and know how to make decisions collectively. Now, first learning from today, I want to give you 3 or 4 points, so I know you're not going to remember the videotaping, but absent getting a copy of the videotape, you're not going to remember everything I said. I'll try to give you 3 or 4 points that you can remember for any time that you find yourself in a company or in a division that is going through struggling for what they want to be and what they don't want to be. And the first insight that I'll give you is that when you set a vision and develop a strategy, the most important thing it does for you, in my view, is teach you what you're not. So it helps you decide what you're not going to do. And when you got 70,000 people, they have 70,000 different ideas on what they think we ought to do. And if we've got something really clear that tells us what we're not going to do, it screens out a lot of those ideas, and that's great. And when you get into good debates about things, it's very good to have some guidelines that tell you, okay, no, we're not going to do that. And I don't have to do an NPV analysis to describe why, right? We've got a strategy and a vision, and that is counter to it, right? So we've made that decision already. We aren't going to revisit it. We're not going to go there. So I think that that's something that, that was going to be very important for us. This is my way to make sure I don't forget any of those 3 or 4 things that, that I was going to tell you about. So we knew we needed to develop that vision. We needed to get 70,000 people on the same page. And the first thing, I'm going to have to type my password in here. So we're going to go through, we're going to go through a test. So we'll do this now. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump forward. So I'm going to tell you the story of how we got to a vision, but first I'm going to show it to you. And this is the exact same way that we showed it to 70,000 Goodyear associates. We call our employees, we call associates. So slide 1, the Goodyear mission. Slide 2, 4 parts. And this is what represents the essence of Goodyear to the people that work there, including the leadership team. So we describe first our global purpose, which is the reason we exist. Talk about our common goals, which are the things that we are trying to achieve as a team. Our shared values, which are the things that guide our actions, the things that we will not violate, even if we can make money, the things that we hold true and the things that makes us want to be Goodyear associates. And then finally, the leadership traits, the things that distinguish the people that we want leading the company, the traits that they need to exhibit day to day to be effective leaders within the Goodyear Tire and Rubber Company. So those 4 areas are the areas that we focused on. And then we gave a simple slide for each of those. So all around the world, Goodyear's purpose is to increase the value of our brands for everyone with market-driven innovation, delivering the highest quality tires, related products and services for our customers and consumers. Okay? What word do you not see in there? What's that?
Shareholders value.
One more time?
Shareholders value.
Shareholder value, okay, fair enough. So the finance guys lost the argument on that one. What else do you not see?
Market share.
Market share, right. Market share and volume, right? So it wasn't that, we have people there who are, a guy who, one of the guys I worked with, and we'll talk about the team in a minute, came from Procter & Gamble. He runs our European operations now, and Arthur DeBach, I can tell you, is all about market share. You know, it was a core value for him, but we realized that because of the mistakes of the past, that we couldn't have volume and market share on this piece of paper. So that's our purpose. Our common goals, things we're trying to accomplish as a team. First, and very importantly here, is a statement about the importance of people at Goodyear. And that's attracting, developing, motivating, and retaining the best team of associates. Second is the relationships we want to build. So earning and building long-lasting relationships and exceeding expectations for the people that we do business with. And that's our customers, it's our suppliers, everybody that we interact with, including our communities. Driving an efficient, aligned, and effective organization. And for a company that does business in 80 countries, alignment and efficiency are the hardest things to achieve. Very, very tough to get everything to work well together. And then creating a sustainable business model that consistently delivers a strong return on investment. So the finance guys got page 2. So we managed to get it up there. Our shareholders are important to us as well. We realize that. So that was the second piece, common goals. Third piece, values. So delivering the highest quality in all we do. So quality, honesty, integrity, and respect, wellness and safety, both on and off the job. Caring for our environment, so sustainability, supporting a team-based culture, and discussing problems openly and solving them as a team. So there's some in there that you see that are generic. Every company has a comment about sustainability. There are some in there that are unique to Goodyear that are things like solving problems openly. And you can tell there that that's not the way things used to work. So that was one of the things we wanted to make sure was there. Okay. Last point is what we expect from our leaders, 5 points. Building talent and teams, having the ability to solve problems, effective communicators, making courageous decisions, and delivering results. So the finance guys got that one too. So those are the things that made up our vision. So I'm giving you the end product. The importance is the journey, not as much as the end product, and I want to talk about that. But I'm here giving a presentation on developing a corporate vision. So what else did you not see on any of those slides?
Between ideas.
Okay. What else?
Timeline.
Okay, no timeline, good. That's an important point because we were trying to come up with a document that would last for decades, not years. So we were consciously trying to extend the timeline, but I think it's a fair point. What else? I know, it's way too subtle. This is one of those answers that's easier than you think. Right, I'm giving a presentation on corporate vision. There's no vision. The word vision isn't here. There is no vision. Right, the biggest punchline to the development of Goodyear's corporate vision was there is no vision. And there's a reason for that. Ultimately, this process, and I'll talk about the process, it wasn't about developing a vision. It was about discovering why we were there. That's second insight that I think you should remember. When you set out to figure out a vision for your organization, you're on a journey of discovery, not creation. Now, I have to admit, I'm not speaking for Silicon Valley. I'm not speaking for entrepreneurial situations. I'm probably talking more about established organizations who already have some track record in business. But it's ultimately about figuring out who you are and expressing it so everybody in the organization thinks about it the same way. And so you have a good chance of helping people figure out whether they want to be there or they don't want to be there. Right? So it's that kind of alignment that you're trying to achieve, and with 70,000 people, it's a big job. Right? So we were trying not to go into a conference room and come up with a vision. We were trying to talk to people and reflect with ourselves and look at other companies. We're trying to figure out who we were, figure out what we stood for, figure out what the most important things were for us to be successful as a business. And that's what this process was about. So you'll hear me reference Rich Kramer a few times. He's a very smart guy. He's also my boss. Maybe he'll see the video and that'll help me. He's a very smart guy. So the first thing Rich Kramer did in putting together, in moving toward having a corporate vision, which became a corporate mission, was get a team of people together. And here's who he chose. It wasn't an obvious choice, but he wanted people from the leadership team of the company. So there's a top dozen people in Goodyear. And he wanted to choose from that group because he knew that they would have insights, they would have connections, they would have reach into the organization, and they would be able to do this and harness the resources that would help it make sense. And if the leadership team doesn't believe, it's very hard to get 70,000 other people to believe. So the leadership team had to believe. So he wanted some of his team to do it. So who did he choose? Okay, well, I'll tell you who he chose, and I'll tell you a little bit of why. First of all, he did choose the guy who's responsible for public relations. Okay? So he chose Ed Markey. Ed Markey's background, he was a writer for David Letterman before he went into his corporate career, and obviously he's funnier than most of us and probably better at this than most of us. But he chose Ed. Ed had been in our PR department. He had a good feel for marketing and certainly had a good feel for how to connect to people. Because he had a hard job for a long time just trying to figure out how to make a real diverse group of people out in the world laugh at jokes. So we had Ed Markey. We had Arthur DeBach, who I mentioned earlier, has a career at Procter & Gamble, runs our European operations, represented a number of our markets, but the largest part of our business outside North America was in Europe. And Arthur, also a very smart guy, good marketing orientation, very good customer orientation. So chose Arthur DeBach. Third person he chose was Joe Rucco. And Joe spent, as our head of HR, spent most of his career at General Electric, and had come to Goodyear relatively recently, where Ed Markey spent 15 years at Goodyear. Joe Rucco had spent only spent a couple of years at Goodyear. Arthur DeBach and I both came in back at the beginning of the 2000s. So Arthur had been about 10 years, and then me, the finance guy. And that was the team that he chose. And I'd spent most of my time in the auto industry, so I had a feel for that. I was numbers oriented by my background. And I think that what he did was select a pretty diverse team. So this is a group of people who are going to have lots of different perspectives. They have respect within the organization. They have some good ties to the organization. Some have been here shorter time, some longer. And that's what he wanted. So he wanted diversity of thought. And if you're trying to develop something that's going to make sense to 70,000 people, you got to have diversity. So that's thought number 3 for you to remember. Is you want something that's going to be very effective in a large group, you got to get a diverse group of people involved. Now, following on Rich's lead, as a team, we had to figure out how we would get organized. And I think we understood the challenge that was in front of us as well, because whatever we came up with, we had to face our peers. So the rest of the dozen leadership team at Goodyear and our boss, the CEO, who is has his own opinions, as all CEOs do. And although he turns out to be an excellent listener, which I think served us well. But we got to also appeal to 70,000 people out there, and that's our test. Is we got to get something that makes sense to all of them. And it's got to make sense in 80 countries. And it's got to make sense in a couple of dozen languages. So how are we going to go about this? Well, we started out with a strategy of looking inside and outside. Okay, so 4th learning point. You got to look both. You can look inside your company because you are on a journey of discovery in this case. So you want to know what's the company about. And you want to know what's the company about from a lot of people's perspectives. So you want to ask people in different functions. You want to ask people in different regions of the world. What is it that our business is about? What is it that we're about as people? What are the leadership traits that are important to us? Right? So we wanted to get that feedback. We also wanted to look outside. So we looked at 32 other companies. And we picked the companies carefully. We picked companies that we admired. We picked companies who were known for having strong visions and who are captured in books, in documentaries, in academic research, as companies who have very clear laser focus on who they are. So anywhere from beverage makers to technology companies, 3M, places like that everybody knows. Everybody knows what you're talking about when you're talking about 3M. We're 3M, the people who, they don't make a lot of the products they use, they make a lot of the products they use better. Everybody knows their technology focus. So we went through company by company, evaluating what their vision and mission statements looked like, so that we understood. So we knew what they were doing to try to appeal to all the people that worked at their companies. It gave us a lot of alternatives. It gave us a lot of thoughts. And we then turned to the academic research or write-ups. And I call it academic research. There was a little bit of that. There's some Harvard Business Review articles and things like that, that we went through. We also read books, right? So and I'm particularly partial to the Jim Collins books. Built to Last, Good to Great, and now most recently Great by Choice. I love those books. I find a lot of very practical insights into them. And I think particularly we paid attention to a few sections, like in the book Good to Great. There's a chapter there on the hedgehog principle, which I find to be a really good insight about companies trying to figure out what they're good at, what they can be the best at, what are they really going to focus their time and attention into. So as a group, we went through and we reviewed that. We reflected on it. We thought about those things, so that we were getting something that wouldn't just appeal to the masses, which we thought, well, if we were just very generic, then 70,000 people might look at it and not disagree. But we wanted to get beyond that. We wanted to find things that 70,000 people would look at, and lots of them would get very passionate about. And that takes a little bit more reflection. Now, Jim Collins said the average time frame for figuring out what the hedgehog principle is for a company. Anybody not know what a hedgehog principle is? It's just a hedgehog, the animal, is very good at one thing. One thing. It rolls up in a ball, has pointy spikes on the outside. That's its defense. That's all it's able to do. It has nothing else to keep it safe, but it knows how to do that and do it very well. And they're survivors. So the hedgehog principle is, what does a company figure out that it's really, really good at? That's the one thing that will help it survive and excel, hopefully excel. So it said it takes 4 years for a company to figure that out. Now, we worked on the Goodyear mission for about a year. So the proof in this mission is the future. Because I can't say that we figured it out. If it takes 4 years for other companies to figure this out, I don't know why it would take 1 for us. Now, we've been around for 113 years. And we've had other visions in the past. Maybe that puts us a little further forward, I don't know. But there is a very big test of this going forward. So but we spent some time reading books like that, chapters of books, references, articles, trying to figure out what makes one work, what makes a vision and a mission work, what makes it appeal to large groups of people, what makes it drive corporate performance, and what makes it survive and live year after year after year. Yeah.
Just curious, up until implementation, how much did you rely on consultant firms? So like the big 3, big 4?
Never talked to one.
That answers my question.
Now, about this. Now, I'll say we've worked, the time I've been with Goodyear, we've spent a lot of time, a lot of money, on consulting firms. And there are things that they've been very, very good at. And Goodyear has had the opportunity to work with some very talented consultants. But there was a conscious choice. Again, Rich didn't want to know what a group of consultants thought our vision should be. He wanted to know what we thought. So that was another conscious choice that he made. And I think it was a smart one. He pushed us to think deeply about this. The thing about working with consultants, and I'll say it, I know it's a bit generic, and there may be some people in the audience who've worked in consulting. My father, after teaching at the business school at University of Kansas, became a consultant. He was a consultant the rest of his career. So I was raised by a consultant, and yet I still have a little bit of skepticism about it. But the time that consulting really works well is when a team works really closely with the consultants. So I'm not sure that it would have been any different if we had used a consulting firm, but Rich didn't want. I think Rich ultimately wanted to find out what we could get done, and he had some confidence that the group that we had internally would be able to get a handle on this one. So, and I think he also felt like it would be much easier to get buy-in if it did not come from a consulting firm. So I'm not the only one who has some skepticism about consulting firms, yeah, in the company. So we'll come back to that topic, some other time. But anyway, so we developed, we took the strong look outside the company, and then we took a strong look inside the company. So we talked informally to people within the company that we view as opinion leaders. So people who really knew the essence of Goodyear. And I know that this is going to be apparent to some of you, less apparent to others. But when you go to work for a company, after a while, you just get to know some of the people there who are, they are Mr. or Miss, Mr. or Miss Goodyear or Mr. or Miss Ford. They're just, for me, there's always been those people. They just, they bleed blue and gold at Goodyear. And some of them were our marketing organization. Some of them were engineers, so focused on our technology. But those people within the company had a lot to say about it, and we saw them out. And we knew that they would have influence on how others thought, and that would give us some insight into what they might say when they saw it. So we reached out to those people and got their thoughts. And what we did at first was pretty unstructured. We got them to write down their thoughts about what Goodyear is, what it means, what we should do, what our values should be, how we should do business, and how we shouldn't do business. And we got those feelings, and we started to compile, based on those thoughts, based on some of our own thoughts, a few comments and thoughts from the boss, and the research that we had done with other companies. We started to develop nothing that looked quite like this, but we started to develop some themes and some thoughts, and started to get them down on a few PowerPoint slides so we could sit and debate them amongst ourselves. And that process lasted a month or so, and then we took it to our peers. So we took it to the leadership team at Goodyear, and we got our peers' feedback because we knew they were going to be a tough audience for us. And as you can expect, they're all business leaders in their own right. They had lots of opinions. And what quickly became clear is we were never going to get agreement with 12 people. So I was pretty glad we had a team of just 4, because 4 was manageable, 12 was not manageable. But they gave us some good feedback. They told us where some weaknesses were. They'd all do it differently than we would have done it. But there was some good advice there, some watch out, some pitfalls that we could avoid. But what we all agreed very quickly is we had to road test whatever we were going to do. So that was the point where we said, all right, we got to package this, and we got to take it out and see what the masses think. And we didn't want to just publish it to 70,000 people. That was risky, because then they'd look at it and maybe they'd like it, maybe they wouldn't. But we didn't want them to think that this was random. We didn't want to think it was trial and error. But what we did do is we set up focus groups around the Goodyear world. And that forced us to formulate it into something that's not too far from the 4 slides that we went through today. So we went out and did focus groups. And we said, all right, we need a relatively good cross-section of all of the different cultures. We need to translate this into a couple of different languages, and let's see if the words still make sense to people. So we went out and we spent about 3 months doing focus groups. Ultimately, over 200 people took part in these focus groups, and they gave feedback. And they gave feedback, part of which was on the specific language that was used, because in some countries, the language that we had originally used didn't mean the same thing that it did to us in English, and we had to be very careful about that. There were some cases where there were some things on the page that people reacted negatively to. Some of those were defensive comments. There were some things people thought were missing. There were a couple of things that we let go of in this process that were big. So if you ever come to Goodyear's headquarters in Akron, Ohio, over every doorway says "Protect our good name." And this is in the 50s, when this building was built, that was a very important value. And there's nothing wrong with "Protect our good name." There's nothing wrong with that as a thought. I mean, we should be very cognizant of our reputation, but it comes across a bit defensive. It's not about what we're going to achieve. It's about, let's be really careful and not push too hard. And when you're trying to push big into emerging markets and things like that, it's there's a balance. So there's some things people didn't like as well, some things people thought were missing, and we tried to react to that. So I think that's and ultimately that feedback was some of the most valuable to us, because we were really getting feedback from a cross-section of the people, and these were all levels of the organization, all geographies. They were as good a representation as we could get of the 70,000 people that we were going to ultimately have to appeal to. So by that time we had our document, and one of the things we really struggled with was that no one liked any of the vision statements that we had put together. They were very supportive of some of the mission. They loved the leadership traits. They thought the values were very good. They were very happy to see things like environmental sustainability, caring about people inside work and outside work, the top priority that we put on people and building our teams. All those came across very well, but we actually had 3 or 4 different vision statements that we had drafted as well. Using all those 32 companies that we looked at and trying to see what they did, academic research, things inside and outside the company. But the feedback we got on every one of the vision statements is a lot of, well, we don't understand it, or that's not really what we're about, or that's not why I'm here, from the people out in the field. And that was our decision point, that one of the two things. Either we weren't smart enough to come up with a good vision statement, or we weren't ready for one yet. I like to think of it as the second one. It was the company for a long time, 2003 to 2007, had been focused on survival. And maybe the organization wasn't ready for a vision yet. And that's okay. I don't think it's taken anything away from the impact that we've had in developing the document that we went through today. Okay. So that's a little bit of background where Goodyear was, where we were, where we started out, process we went through. Once Rich Kramer decided, okay, it's time to have a mission, have a vision, have a document that lays out and proclaims to our associates and to the world who we're going to be, and more importantly, who we're not going to be. And then the challenge came down to trying to make this live. So we had to bring this document to life. 70,000 people. We had to make it real. And 70,000 people is a lot of people. We don't have an email system that reaches all those people. It reaches a lot of them, but not all of them. We don't have everything translated into every language for every person. We count on some of that to happen as it's passed down the organization. So it was a big logistics challenge, but we said, all right, we have to, the proverbial eating the elephant a bite at a time. So sending a blast email out is probably not going to work. Just putting it up on our website, people will be aware of it, but probably not going to realize how important it was. So the starting point we decided was, if we got 12 of us on the leadership team familiar with it, the next step was going to be to test it out on the people that reported to us. So we pulled a group into Akron. So 100 of the top people from across the company to come in, and we got up and we had to go through some thoughts as to how we communicated to them. So the first thing was the fact that we brought them to Akron. And in the 10 years I'd been with the company, we had never brought that many people to Akron. So we do business in a very decentralized basis. Our offices, the big groups of people for Goodyear are in Brussels, Sao Paulo, Brazil, Shanghai, China, and Akron, Ohio. So 4 places. So we have meetings all over the world. A lot of those people had never been to Akron, Ohio. And for those of you who don't know, Akron, Ohio, in addition to being Goodyear's headquarters, is the historical center of the universe for the tire industry. So there was a time in Akron, Ohio where General Tire, Firestone Tire, Goodrich Tire, and Goodyear Tire were all headquartered there. And there were 50,000 people in the factories in Akron building tires. So 50 years ago, Akron had tires everywhere. The whole city smelled like tires. But for people who are working in the tire industry globally, who know some of that history, the idea of going to Akron was a big deal. And that little informal piece of feedback turned out to be a real breakthrough for us. Because the fact that we brought all these leaders in, 1 and 2 levels down the organization to Akron, Ohio for a big event, by itself communicated how important what we were doing was. So sometimes it's not what you say, it's what you do. So we were coming out of the global recession, money was tight, we weren't up for spending money on a lot of things, but we brought everybody together and made it a very big event. We entertained them a little bit, we taught them a little bit, but mostly we rolled out the mission. And we had to figure out who was going to do that, and the answer to this question was pretty obvious to us, because it wasn't Rich Kramer, it wasn't the leader of the organization up owning it and delivering the message to the team, it wasn't going to work. So we brought everybody to Akron, and I know that not everyone will always have the option of using Akron as a venue. Again, a topic for a different day. But we brought everybody to Akron, we spent 3 days, and we rolled it out. We communicated it to people, we explained what each sentence on there meant to us, and Rich Kramer stood in front of them like I'm standing in front of you for a couple hours, talking about why we have a mission, what it is, what the words meant to him. We videotaped it, we played it for everybody in the company. Hopefully he looked a lot better than I expect to look on this videotape. But he did that, and not because anything he said was that special, but because it was personal. So he was up leading the organization, he had to stake out some ground. That this is why we're here. He was at the beginning of his tenure as a CEO. Rich Kramer is, I'll get his age wrong, he's 47 or 48 years old. So he's a young CEO, well respected in the organization. People expect for him to be around for a while. And he was staking out ground that this is important. This is what we're going to be about. This is how we're going to make decisions. And this is how we're going to decide what we're going to do, and more importantly, what we're not going to do as a company. And by doing that, he immediately made it relevant. Because everybody in the organization wants to make decisions, and they want support for their decisions, so they immediately get some insight into how the CEO is thinking about the business. So whatever happens in their part of the organization, if they've got to get some support or agreement or approval, they know right away. You align it with the mission, it becomes important. It's a good way to present your case. So I think Rich did a very good job at that. We played that video over and over for people in the organization. That was important, but it's not a one-time communication. And we realized that as well, and that's where the benefit of having someone from our public relations area on the team really came into play, because they started using all of the tricks of the trade for public relations and marketing to help us. So, and that's anywhere from the communications tools we have with people, so posters in every conference rooms around the world, kind of a big effort, little pocket cards that have it on there, little tent cards to put on tables, internet, video strategies, all things were employed. And so you go anywhere in the world of Goodyear, and you look on the wall, you're going to see the same thing. And if you go to any presentation at Goodyear, you're going to get an acknowledgement of it. And that's maybe the hardest thing that I've found about it, because we rolled this out about a year ago, almost a year ago, is I'm real tired of talking about it now. Because I've been talking about it for 2 years. I know these words, I've read them a lot, I've explained them to people many times. But we don't have 70,000 people there yet. I don't know how long it's going to take before we have 70,000 people there, but it's the discipline to keep bringing back. And this is my 5th and final insight for you for today. And I want to open it up and take some questions. Right? Is you cannot reiterate it and repeat it enough. So every time we do a presentation, every time we do a strategy review, every time we do an operating review, every time Rich Kramer talks to investors, we try to bring it back. Some part of it, not the whole thing. We don't always read it to each other the way I read it to you today. But every time we have the opportunity, we try to take a piece of it and make it live a little bit. It's tough discipline. You have many problems that you face every day, The most urgent ones are the ones you tend to work on, and none of those are ever about driving home a mission statement or a vision. But unless you build it into your work every day, every week, every month, maybe this will work, maybe it won't. We'll all find out in the long term, and maybe some of you will have a chance someday to ask somebody who works at Goodyear whether or not they know what the mission is. And I'd encourage you to do it. But that's what will ultimately be the test as to whether or not we've done a good job. But I know if we don't do it, then we certainly won't get that outcome. Too many things come and go in corporations. You know, the normal thing is to have a new program every year. And the next year there's another one, and you forget about the one from last year. The toughest thing is to have something that lives beyond a year and becomes ingrained in the way people think about the company. And that's what a vision should be about. What questions do you have?
Obviously, 70,000 people is not a small number. What function or department is taking the longest, or generally takes the longest to buy into the new vision or buy into the new strategy?
Yep. Yeah, so the thing that leaps to my mind for that question is our manufacturing function. And I'll tell you why. First of all, it's the function that has the largest number of people. Because the manufacturing function is going to include all our associates that work on the factory floor. And we got tens of thousands of those around the world that work in our tire factories. They tend to be the ones who have the greatest variety of languages. Our professional staff tend to be more likely to speak English, more likely to speak one of the, more of a common language, less likely to speak local dialects. Not true of the factory floor, so that's a big challenge. The other challenge is that manufacturing is the part of the company where we have some of our longest serving associates. So they've been around the most, and they're the ones that have seen the more programs come and go than anybody else. So their level of natural skepticism is high. And so having a breakthrough with those guys is a big deal. And ultimately, that'll be one of our big tests. Is do the people on the factory floor, and it's, I believe this absolutely, having the people on the factory floor able to explain it to us and help them make decisions with it, that's the test. If it makes sense to them, then we've done our jobs, and we've gotten all the way down there. But I think that's the toughest. Tough to break through the natural skepticism, tough to make people believe this is anything more than just this year's, or the flavor of the month, so to speak. And the people who have been subjected to the most programs are the ones who are the most skeptical.
Now, would unions also potentially affect that if your mission totally changes what they're doing?
Yep. So fair enough. And you have to take into account unions. When you have a represented workforce, you do have to take into account the feelings that they're going to have. But I can tell you that for us, while our organized workforce in North America, represented by the United Steelworkers, they're Goodyear associates first to us. And for most of them, most of them have been with us for a long time, and they care very deeply about the product. They care about the quality, they care about the brand, and they care about our customers and our success as a business. And for most of them, they know where those tires are going. If they're building a tire for Ford Motor Company or for General Motors or for Chrysler, or for Discount Tire for Walmart, they know they're doing it. They know where it's going. So they have those connections, and they care about it. And most of my experience with them is, they care. They care about some of the same things we do. So, and the fact that we value people this much, and that we put people at the top of our list speaks volumes to them. So that was definitely a constituency we had to think about, and something that we've continued to think about. Yep.
So in one of the slides, you talked about creating business model or something around business model. I was wondering, for a company that's been around for 100 years, what would business model refer to at this point in time? What are you trying to do?
Yeah. So fair enough. And what we think of our business model as market back. So I think first and foremost. So we're trying to figure out who are the customers and which are the segments of the tire market that we want to participate in. And we build our business model off of that. So if we know if we think about the tire business as having, you think of it many different ways, but I can give you 3 categories. The tire business, typically you go into a tire store and you're going to get the good, better, and best. 3 levels of products. Now, I know it could be a lot more complex than this. We operate with thousands of SKUs, but there's still this theory that there's kind of tires that are good enough, but they're as cheap as you can get. Better, start to have some technology, and the best tires are the ones that give you the best handling, best performance, best fuel economy in some cases, best grip on ice, best grip on snow, some of the most technical, hard to achieve attributes. And so what we're looking at first is, okay, which parts of the market are we going to participate in? Who are the consumers that want to buy those tires? And then what's the distribution that's going to allow us to connect with those customers? And what are the technologies and the products that are going to appeal to them? Right, so that's the way we build our business model. It's ultimately led us to a strategy today, and strategy being different than vision, to a strategy of being very careful about our targeted market segments, and targeting segments where good return on investment is available. Right, so that's our business model. The reference in the vision we were very careful about because we know that business model may have to change over time. Right now we're at a time in the tire industry where the level of technology that goes into tires is on a very steep ramp up, driven partly by regulation, partly by what the automakers need tires to do, partly by the green trend and the need for better fuel economy. So we look at the next 5 to 10 years and say it's getting harder and harder to be able to make tires, let alone make tires that have competitive advantage. And so we know we have a business model right now that works in that 5 to 10 year horizon, but we know that model may have to evolve, and we want the vision to allow for that. Good. Yep.
I just want to get your thoughts about, so as you guys do change your mix to a more higher end, higher margin tire, do you worry about, what Clayton Christensen's disruptive innovation model talked about, happening in the steel industry, for instance?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And with, competitors that are taking the lower end of the market now, but as they improve technologically over time,
Yep.
with their cost advantages vis-a-vis you,
Mm-hmm.
Being able to take market share from, you guys have retreated up market, if you will.
Yep.
So how do you see that playing out?
Yeah. So I think it's it's an important question. I think we said earlier we're not playing for volume, right? First of all, so we'll look at our business. We can scale. We don't have to sell a certain number of units. We're looking for a certain amount of value in certain customers. And the way we look at the business today is that there is a shortage of tires at the premium end. So for the top technology, there's not enough of the tires in the world. People have trouble getting enough. And so that's the situation we're in today. The technology curve is stretching out. So the big 3 tire companies, the tire companies with better R&D, are out in the lead right now. And not that can never change, but the thing that if we look at investments that we're making for the next 5 to 10 years and where we focus our teams for that period of time, we've got an industry that has a history of innovation, but at an evolutionary pace. And so we look at the idea, and we worry about the idea of a disruptive technology. So we've got competitors that have come out with things like something besides a pneumatic tire. So what if there was something that looked like a wheel that wasn't full of air? What would that be like? Would that be a disruptive technology? And what's ultimately happened in the tire industry is there's a huge ecosystem that tires fit within. And there's nothing in particular about our product that prevents there from being disruptions, but there is something in that ecosystem that prevents it. And it is the huge installed base of vehicles, wheels, and service outlets. So that if there was to be something that fundamentally changed the nature of a tire, and I'll talk about a couple that we've looked at, unless it was also able to fit on existing wheels, to be serviced by existing equipment, every country around the world, and fit and perform with existing vehicles, it would take a very long time for it to be adopted. So when the radial tire was invented, I think it was invented in the 1940s. It was brought to commercial use in the 1960s. And everybody started moving from what's called a bias tire to a radial tire. And I barely knew what a bias tire was when I went to work in the tire business. But the radial tire creates a level of performance and durability that is much higher. So you're much less likely to get a flat, which is a big deal. And it works much better on well-paved roads. We are still moving from radial to bias. It's now 50 years later. That's how long the product cycles and technology cycles tend to last in our industry. So we've looked at technology like a run-on flat tire, which is, is our answer in some ways to people worried about getting a flat tire. You invent a tire that has very stiff sidewalls, whether there's air in it or not, it'll still roll down the road. And we thought, okay, this could be a disruptive technology. So what have we learned? And we came out with that, put it on the Corvette in 1992. This was something that was great. You don't have to have a spare tire. You can never get a flat. You can always drive another 50 or 100 miles on the tire, even if there is no air in it. You can put a hole the size of your fist in this tire, and it still rolls. And it's safe, and you can turn and get yourself to a place to get it fixed. 1992, we came out with it. It's 2012 now, 20 years later, and it's 3% of the market. It's a great technology. It takes a lot of different equipment to manufacture it, so it's hard. A lot of capital investment has to go into that. For a while, there were technologies for run-on flats that required different wheels. Those ultimately died because no one was willing to invent new wheels. So even though you had a great new technology for tires, the existing ecosystem was, was in the way. So it's something we worry about, clearly. But what we've done is that our technologists have looked at where the vulnerable areas are and where the vulnerable areas are not. Now, I think there are other vulnerable areas that we have to look at, things like new materials, because we use a lot of materials that come from oil. And oil as a commodity is volatile. We all know what volatile parts of the world it comes from. So there's a lot of work, a lot of time and effort we're putting into developing synthetic rubber that's not made from oil, that is instead made from organic means. So it's sort of the equivalent of biofuels, but it's bioisoprene or biorubber for us. Things like that worry. Those worry me more if someone got ahead of us in that respect. A little bit less on the tire technology, but the fact that there's so many of those problems trying to get resolved tells me it's an industry where the research and development is going to mean a lot for a long period of time. The Chinese have been investing in a huge way, trying to catch up, and they are years and years away from it. And the business is presenting with opportunities to advance every year and keep fighting it out among the big three. So I don't know, for 5 to 10 year horizon, I think we look at it and say, we're okay. We're going to be able to keep ahead of them. They'll keep coming. And unless the technology curve keeps going, our business model will have to adapt to that. We do build tires in all the same countries they do, though, which is, so it's not that they build all their tires in one country, we build ours in another. We build tires in every country, or in many countries around the world, including where our low-cost competitors do business. So. It's a good question. Outside, maybe a little bit beyond, more about the tire business than you wanted to know, but it's okay. Yep.
Hi. First of all, thank you for coming today. This question might be a little bit beyond the scope of just developing the vision and communicating that.
Yep.
A number of us were in a class on organizational design, and a big theme was the concept of the learning organization, and that those are really the only ones that will be able to succeed long term. It seemed through your process and through slides such as having the associates communicate and learn from each other as being important. So going forward, do you see certain organizational structural changes that Goodyear was making to really reinforce this mission and vision alignment?
I might struggle thinking about organization changes that were made specifically to support the vision. But there are clearly changes that are taking place, part of which are there to make us operate better as a global business. And the vision is all about that. And the mission is all about that because we are a global brand We have global technology. We have to leverage the global strengths of the company. And I'll tell you what has really made a big difference, and is the growing trend for us, is sort of the organizations that are put together outside the structural organization. So we have in each of our, we operate our business geographically. So we build tires mostly for passenger cars and trucks, some for large equipment. We build those in every area of the world, and the business is broken down: North America, Europe, Middle East, Africa, Latin America, and Asia Pacific. It's broken down that way. Every one of those regions has a finance function, a supply chain function, manufacturing function, marketing function. The thing that's really started to take hold for us, though, is process clubs that are put together across the regions. We're gradually trying to work at making sure that the best practice that we have anywhere is available everywhere. So I think more than anything else, it's that. It's trying to break down some of the regional barriers that we have, even barriers across businesses, knowing that when we have a business running consumer tires, there are things we can learn that can apply to commercial truck tires. It seems obvious, but big companies tend to struggle with that. Yeah, so you do get stuck in silos. So it's trying to create those additional structures that allow for that sharing. I think that's probably the big thing that we've been working through.
Now that you have the vision in place about a year ago, you've spoken, you can say one thing and then it's about what you do. Are there things that have been put in place for accountability, making sure people are actually thinking through the vision when they go to make a decision, perhaps in performance reviews biannual, kind of make you think maybe forward looking, first of all, say,
Yep.
what's your goals behind this vision, and then maybe reverse hold you accountable to that?
Yep. No, fantastic question. And the performance management systems are a tremendously underappreciated aspect of running a good organization. And you could shortcut it by saying that's how you do performance reviews, but it's not. So the idea of setting the right type of goals every year for every person, 70,000 people, is an exercise in and of itself. And we've actually got a great tool that we work together with a company called Success Factors to bring to Goodyear. A lot of companies use Success Factors. But one of the things that we did is we built this, it's a web-based tool for setting goals, documenting performance and feedback, doing career development, and assessing people against leadership traits. And one of the things that we did was put cues that go back to the mission into the system. So as people set goals, it's in front of them. As we evaluate their performance, these leadership traits are brought into that performance evaluation, so that the goals of the organization, the mission of the organization is ever present. Now, there's some things about goal setting that don't have to do with the mission. They have to do with our current business strategy and the financial targets that we have to hit in a current period. But there are some nice tie-ins there, and we do make a very big deal out of that, particularly when it comes down to individual development. What else? This way? Yeah.
So early on, you mentioned that the way is not good at strategy. I can understand that it's more practical than anything else. But when, let's say, you scale down to a way small organization, you're operating in an environment of greater uncertainty. How do you balance that out? What would you use as your kind of guiding principle, guiding line?
Yep.
You're always fighting fires all the time.
Yep. So I'll tell you how we did it. And there are probably lots of answers to that question. But when we were going through the firefighting, there was, I think, more of a top-down approach. So what we did was we gave people 7 strategic drivers. So 7 things they should think about as they operated day to day. And I'm not sure I could list all 7 of them for you off the top of my head. But I could still probably name 5 out of 7, because we use those. We said, what are we going to do? We are going to build our brands. We are going to have an advantaged supply chain. We are going to operate with a cash is king philosophy. Driving our business for cash at all points in time. We are going to strive for, we're going to deliver cost savings consistently every year. That's 4 out of 7. Maybe I'll come up with the 5th one. But you know, that's what we did. That's what Bob Keegan did. He said 7 strategic drivers. This is what we're going to be focused on. Now everybody go back to fighting the fires. At the same time, and I don't want to shortcut this, Bob had in mind where he wanted the organization to go. And he knew where our strengths and our assets were, and he wanted to leverage those to try to overcome some of the difficulties. But we were at a point where we weren't ready to develop a mission yet. But he gave people these 7 areas to focus on. So when they were developing their business plans every year, we knew there were 7 boxes to tick. You know, 7 areas we got to be paying attention to. And that was the way that he went about it. And I think that worked okay for the situation we were in.
Just to follow up with that, like, how do you guys know that now's the time that we need to have an integrated mission or integrated vision versus, well, this still works?
Yeah. Yeah, it's a fair question. It's a fair question. I could just say, well, you know it when you see it, right? You know, there's something in the organization as people start to have success and start to achieve some of the goals that were laid out for, for us, what was a turnaround. They start to wonder, this is great, we've been successful, what's next? And when people start to ask the what's next question, pretty good indicator that it's time to develop something to help them with that. Because you don't want people wondering what's next. You want to know what's next. And when you have a mission out there, most of the goals, most of the things in the mission are lofty enough that you never achieve them. They aren't things to be checked off the box, they're things to continually aspire to. And so I can help to answer the what's next question for people. Yeah. Good.
So maybe I missed the point, but how do you explain the ethics or compliance? So I think the compliance would be changed by country.
Yeah.
And also ethics can be different from culture to culture.
Yeah.
How do you state it into the mission?
Yeah. So maybe I should bring. I'm not going to start it up again. I'm going to go to my handy pocket card for reference here. I think the acting with honesty, integrity, and respect is that's sort of our fundamental statement to each other. And when we act with honesty, integrity, and respect, the word integrity takes on a lot of different meanings. We have a fundamental philosophy that you ask those questions first. And that's what we're trying for 70,000 people to understand, is not what do they personally think, but what's the corporate definition of what's acceptable and what's not acceptable behavior. They can live their lives the way they want to live them, but in our corporate life, we have definitions. And we provide a business conduct manual that's the same everywhere in the world to help them understand what integrity means to us in specific terms. And it's about 40 or 50 pages, including examples, to help get to the level of, if you don't know what integrity means in a Goodyear context, here it is. So we spend a lot of time on that one. And in emerging markets in particular, it's one of our biggest challenges. And we're held accountable every day, and I am personally in a lot of ways accountable every day for what every one of the 70,000 people do. So we spend a lot of time worrying about making sure they understand the rules and what the right things to do are. Yep.
So you mentioned earlier about moving the focus from volume, and I can see how that plays into the mission of making greatest decisions and creating value above all. What other examples can you share of that, how a new mission and vision has affected your business and strategic decisions?
Well, I think here's another example. We have great distribution networks. And when I say that, it means we've got logistics and transportation, warehousing to move a lot of tires. And given that we've gone from selling 215 million tires 10 years ago to 180 million last year, there's extra bandwidth there. So we could move more tires than we're moving, and we're good at that. Now, one of the things that some of our creative associates moved us into was the idea of going and buying tires from other companies and using our distribution channels to deliver those to dealers. And those tires didn't bear a Goodyear brand. In fact, Goodyear has about 6 brands we operate with globally. Goodyear and Dunlop are the big global brands. We have a couple of regional brands, Kelley Springfield here in the US, and others in Europe. But the thing about that business was it didn't really have anything to do with our brands, right? So we're here to build our brands, and I think it may not be the only consideration, but that's a consideration for us. So if we're going to spend time and resources, and the scarcest resource we have, as much as we went through some financial difficulties, scarcest resource we have is talented people. So we have to ask ourselves, why do we want our talented people working on something that doesn't do anything to build our brands? Now, the flip side of that is that we want to meet and exceed the expectations of our customers. And for some of our customers, from time to time, they needed to have a value brand to offer to consumers who just are interested in something good enough. That's all they can afford. And there are parts of the world where we provide that. Even though it doesn't do anything to build our brand, it does something to build our relationship with those customers, and at least for a period of time, we want to meet and exceed the expectations of that customer. And for building that relationship, we'll do it. Counting on the fact that that dealer, that customer, is going to help build our brands in the long term. So it's still two sides of the same coin. I know, I'm between you guys in happy hour. It's not a good place to be.
I have one question.
Okay.
Which strays away from the topic on your discussion. As the finance guy, so to speak, or finance person, what drives your capital structure decisions?
When I came to Goodyear, I spent the first 2 years trying to scrape together enough money to keep us running. And I threw out every lesson I had ever learned about corporate finance and ignored them. And my only lesson became, do we have enough? Every corporate finance decision was, are we going to have enough cash to keep operating? Since then, the corporate finance decisions that we've made have been about the principle that competitively we need to be an investment grade company and have ready access to low cost capital throughout economic cycles, because that's what our big competitors have. Right? So we've put that as a principle, and then we've laid next to it the returns that we have available on investments and what hurdle rate we think is worth going after an additional investment, understanding it's going to put off repayment of debt. And that's been a constant balance for us. We set a pretty high return rate on our investments because we do want to favor the fact that over time we need to get ourselves to that, that kind of stability. But corporate financial structure for us was, you go through the different discussions of debt versus equity and and capitalization. For us, the competitor set really determined it. So it was. We were looking for a capital structure that would not create a disadvantage for us, and that's what we're trying to get to. Answer the question?
Yeah.
Not quite.
Well, it did. So I was looking at your debt to equity ratio. It's quite right. So it goes against what you just said.
I am familiar with that.
And so the unfortunate thing is I wasn't able to bring up your competitors to compare.
Yeah.
Right?
So theirs is all better. I'll answer the
usually,
question.
Right? So not to criticize, but if you could just provide some insights as to why it's that high and things
Yep.
that you're doing.
Sure. Here's why it's that high. When I think first of all it was the story at the beginning, right? Big debt-funded acquisition, 1999, added debt to the balance sheet. The next thing that happened was economic weakness and a lot of losses. So Goodyear lost money for many years, so up through about 2004. So 5 years of losses does a lot of damage to your balance sheet. At the same time, retiree health care obligations were skyrocketing. Goodyear ultimately took the action, and we were the first company to do this, of setting up a separate trust fund and funding our retiree health care obligations and getting them off our balance sheet. But we had to pay for that. Right? So we had to pay money to get that obligation off our balance sheet, eliminate the risk of future healthcare inflation, cost money, increased our leverage. Then we have unfunded pension obligations. And an unfunded pension obligation is like a bond, right? So the lower interest rates go, the higher that obligation gets. And Goodyear has the unfortunate distinction of having more unfunded pension obligations compared to our market cap than any other company in the S&P 500. That's what you're seeing. So it's a reaction to those things. The fact that Goodyear had a lot of employees in the past, we have much fewer now, and we're carrying around a lot of legacy obligations. So, and we never went, and I'll point out, the reason that we have that distinction is because everybody else who had all those obligations went bankrupt and got rid of some of them. So we've never done that. We've met our obligations. But it does leave us in a highly levered position. So we are where we are, so we're working our way through it. A lot better now than it was 5 years ago. So I'm now past 4 o'clock, and I know I can't get you past 4 o'clock on Thursday. So thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Just as a small token for coming and spending time with us, making Renaissance Week this much more special on behalf of Kelley School.
Okay. No, thanks very much. Thanks, guys.